affect not just our own country, but people all over the planet. Sometimes, essentially, incidentally, when pharmaceutical companies set prices, they aren't thinking about Sierra Leone, they're thinking about the United States, but has pretty profound consequences for the world's poorest people if not only people, but the government can't afford a particular medicine. So after my first job out of school, before law school, I was answering telephones for a bunch of consumer advocates and came across this issue. And it just struck me as a very powerful one because it's one where a few people working together across borders, there were networks, South Africa, Thailand, Geneva, Washington, D.C., overturning the right patent could potentially save thousands of people's lives. A few people working together smartly, making tremendous outsized impact. And I found that to be pretty compelling. You will hear, if you haven't heard already, the story of global AIDS relief, where AIDS drugs priced $10,000 per person per year meant that nobody was getting those drugs. The world leaders didn't find it cost effective to save the lives of poor people at that price. And it took activists working together worldwide and generics manufacturers out of India to show that, in fact, you could make the same drugs for $1 a day, and we should scale up treatment. We got PEPFAR in the Global Fund, and 20 million lives saved so far. So a pretty powerful example that many of us have sought to today, it's basically 20 years between pandemics is the way I think some of us are sort of feeling or looking at it. I've been in this field a long time, and I don't think we had fully appreciated that part of what we were doing was stewarding a really important set of ideas to the point where the world desperately needed them again. Today, again, we face a situation where a great many people around the world may not get access to treatments, vaccines, diagnostics, even once they exist, this time not only because of their high cost, but because of limited supply, right? So no corporation manufactures at scale to serve the entire world, which means that even once we get a safe and effective vaccine, cross our fingers, have multiple safe and effective vaccines, there will be a long delay before people, between when the first person gets one and when the last person gets one, right? And wealthy people in the United States are likely to get them long before people living in low and middle income countries. The head of the Serum Institute, which is the world's largest vaccine manufacturer out of India, gave an interview recently where he said, we've looked around at global capacity and what people are doing, and it looks to us like it will take 4 to 5 years before we have manufacturing capacity for everyone to get a vaccine. We've seen what the last 8 months have done in the United States. Imagine what several years does to a country with a high incidence rate and no vaccine access. It would be devastating to economies. It won't just be that people lose their lives, it'll be that income inequality gets much worse, and perhaps there are serious political repercussions as well, serious problems with stability. So that's what we're fighting against today, is this prospect of what I've been calling a global vaccine apartheid, where the rich have access and the poor don't. And it's had us working on all cylinders since the pandemic began. When I first came into this work, I was brought in to help middle-income countries largely, but developing countries in general, overcome patent barriers to access to medicines using available tools under law. So I got out of law school. Actually, it was before I even got out of law school. A job opened up. I'd been working with Universities Allied for Essential Medicines, in my amateur capacity. A job opened up at an organization called Essential Action that I thought was pretty interesting to provide technical assistance in developing countries to beat the pharmaceutical lobby and introduce generics. And I crossed the country and took night classes to finish my law degree and started working in an internship capacity the first 6 months in order to get into that job. And when my classes finished, they started, I was doing the work for credit essentially initially. When the classes finished, They started giving me a very small paycheck that has gotten larger over the years and shipped me off to Ecuador before even taking the bar exam. I finished classes, take the bar exam now, right? Nope, you're on a plane in Ecuador. And that was July of 2007, and I still have not taken the bar exam because I have been working on these campaigns ever since, nonstop, as Tayaba knows. Those first 5 or 6 years were all about that. Ecuador, Colombia, Nicaragua, Bolivia, El Salvador. I worked all across Latin America to overcome patent barriers. The job was essentially find good contacts who also wanted to use these tools called compulsory licenses. It's kind of like what UAEM does, but at a country level rather than a university level. Just governments have the right to introduce generic competition with expensive patented drugs essentially anytime. They got to meet a few conditions. But the main, and I had to know all the law and sort of regulatory aspects of that, but the main challenge is just the politics, right? It's an organizing challenge because that means that a government has to decide to stand up to the pharmaceutical lobby, and they have lobbyists everywhere. I've met them in every country. And that means standing up also to the United States government, or standing up to the governments of Europe, which is a challenge. If you're a country like Ecuador, and there was 10 million people or something, it's a little more, 15. That's hard to do. You put trade risks and so on. You take a lot of political risks when you're a country of that size, making that decision. So it depends on international solidarity. All of us sort of coming together to say, you can do this, you have the right to do this. We know it's important to your health, we'll help you get it done. And there's a global access to medicines movement that each of you is now a part of that exists to do just that. UAEM, Doctors Without Borders, Treatment Action Group, Treatment Action Campaign, Oxfam, many treatment groups, patient groups in many countries, all working together as one access to medicines movement. So first, I work to help countries overcome patent barriers. Then I work to keep the rules from getting worse in trade agreements, fought the Trans-Pacific Partnership and other things like that. The past 5 or 6 years, we've brought the fight home. We initially didn't do too much in the United States because the power of the lobby was so great that we didn't think we could win. And that has been changing in recent years. EpiPen, PharmaBro, people have sort of understood that we got to fight this battle in the United States and make medicines affordable here. And we've worked to pass some legislation and draft more ambitious legislation and help the states and the federal government take more action here. Then the pandemic hit, and priorities shifted again because today, as I mentioned, high prices, profiteering, monopolies during a pandemic are a problem, but an even greater problem is the supply shortfall. That if we rely on single manufacturers to deliver treatments and vaccines, it's going to take a very long time to get to everyone. So the solution that we're proposing is share the technology. So the Free the Vaccine campaign that Tayaba, I'm sure, is going to talk to you guys about. You share the technology openly, you share the know-how, teach the world to make vaccines, scale up public manufacturing too, and get a lot more manufacturing capacity than we get if we just rely on one company making its business decisions. So that's the goal, and it's a huge fight. And that is what we do and what we're up to. And I can just pause and, Tayaba, you can tell me what, you said be inspiring. I'm not sure I'm hitting that mark, but I could tell you guys about all the awesome stuff we've won to show you that a difference can be made, but I can also pause for questions. So. Tayaba, what is your guidance? You're muted. Yep.
If anyone has any questions and, they're too shy, you can just drop it in the chat box, and just drop it whenever, and we can definitely get to your question. If anyone wants to ask. Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
I have a question. I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about the Free the Vaccine campaign and kind of what kind of work you're doing with the campaign.
So one way of looking at this is that Free the Vaccine is sort of one expression of a thought that many of us have right now. So like we're doing things in that campaign, and they're also like Oxfam is something they call People's Vaccine, which we also help set up, and you'll hear more from us. So like the thing is, different names in different places are different expressions of it. Free the Vaccine, what I think is great is the sort of use of creativity to help bring a message out, to help inspire people and bring people together. But the underlying policy concept that's the same for all these is what I was talking about in terms of like a vaccine needs to be safe, effective, available to all. We need to take care of vulnerable populations first, but also we can expand supply if we open up the tech, or if we don't like allow the tech to just be monopoly controlled. And so, you know, Free the Vaccine, which I just like am part of, is sort of an advisory capacity, but takes that understanding and asks all of you, and makes it something that you don't have to be an expert to contribute to, because that's been a barrier to organizing in the access to medicines field. You've got a lot of lawyers, you've got a lot of pharmacists, and people start talking in acronyms, when really this all depends on like us insisting on a core morality that we all can understand about sharing and equity and justice. And so Free the Vaccine opens it up to everybody and says, come to us, give us your passion, give us your creative energy, and let's help the world think about this a little differently. Because if you read the news right now, or you don't read too much about the global access issues that are already here and are going to get more serious, but in order to prevent really bad things from happening, we have to be working on it now. Like 6 months and a year from now, the world will be talking about this more. Too many of the deals will already have been made. So we need sort of like to organize now and send the message to key decision makers so that they make different decisions before it's too late. If that made sense. Yeah.
Priya, go ahead.
Have any pharmaceutical companies that are currently developing a vaccine seemed willing to consider sharing the information with other manufacturers?
There is an interesting, there's an interesting level of this that's going on. I think they have yet to really do it in response to pressure. I think, well, that's not entirely true either. I think that they're not doing what we're asking, right? And they're not yet necessarily doing the stuff that they're doing because Tayaba and I, and our friends are asking. But we are going to get there. They are doing things a little differently because they understand these are sophisticated actors, right? They got a lot of lobbyists, a lot of lawyers, a lot of PR people, and they understand that it can't be business as usual, that they have to do some things a little differently. They also want to get to scale also. So you do see, Moderna is a pretty small company, but they're working with, who's Moderna working with? They working with Pfizer? No. But the small biotechs are working with large manufacturers precisely to to manufacture more vaccines quickly. The Gates Foundation and others and the US government we're manufacturing at risk, meaning right, we're building these factories and manufacturing capacity, some of which will not be used because the vaccine candidates will actually fail. But we're investing a ton of money now to advance manufacturing capacity in the hopes that they prove to be safe and effective, so that we can get to access more quickly. So some of this is happening. There are companies that are talking about tech transfer. The Health and Human Services, like even the Trump administration sort of talks about it here and there, and it's not yet clear what they mean or how dramatic they're going to be. The concept is out there in a light way. I think what's sort of missing is it's largely viewed to be at the company's discretion. Like you don't have the US government or anyone else saying, obviously this is a global emergency. We're going to put all our technology together in order to solve it. Rather, you have the US government saying, here's $300 million, please make a vaccine and sell it. So, that's not great. Like we can do a lot better if we're handing out that kind of money.
Anyone else want to ask a question real quick?
The World Health Organization does have a technology access pool. I should say it's not like there are official initiatives underway to do exactly what we're talking about here, to share the tech. And like part of our job is to generate support for them and say all the world should be contributing to that. And to fill in like our political plan and why I think we can win here, right? I mean, the US government obviously needs to change course. Like the Trump administration is tremendously damaging to all of these ideas through its isolationism. But if there is a change of government, there's a real opportunity to help that government retake a new sense of like what does American leadership mean, as they might see it, and what does U.S. interest mean in terms of like protecting our own interest in access to a vaccine if it comes from China, for example, and things like that, and to engage in to basically re-engage with the world, and we're going to do everything we can to make that a central concept of a next U.S. government.
Anyone else have questions at the moment? Totally fine if you don't.
There are, two other things I feel like I should mention. One is that treatment rationing is already really bad in the United States, right? And just acknowledge that. And it is, of course, like health disparities are serious. We have disparities, by race and inclusion criteria and wealth and everything else. And we got to fight to change that here. We also are working on legislation that could change that in the next Congress, which is also somewhat dependent on what happens in this election. But that's its own line of work that we're engaged in. So like, 25 to 30% of people living in the United States have rationed their own access to medicines based on its cost. So it's not only a problem of low and middle income countries, but in the United States, we probably will get access to a vaccine. The plans are to purchase hundreds of millions of doses for everyone living here and to roll it out according to CDC criteria that may not be, like the wealthiest get it first. So we might actually not be in the worst situation here if we can navigate vaccine politics, like, anti-vaxxers and everything else, and actually get a safe and effective vaccine, which is like, we're going to have to go through, camel through the eye of the needle whole thing here between like having a vaccine that is safe and effective and that anti-vaxxers don't reject and so on. But like we cross that, we should have enough supply for the United States, but other countries are going to be in a really difficult situation if we don't fix this problem. Sorry. The other thing I wanted to say is we know that we can win because of all these times that it's happened before, because with global AIDS, a relatively small number of people did show the world that it was possible to do it differently, and millions of lives have been saved. In my own career, we won in Ecuador. We knocked half a point off GDP. It took several years because of corruption from the other side, but we did it. We knocked down AIDS drug prices 90% in Colombia because the government was embarrassed that it was paying more than its neighbors, which is something we pointed out. It was a neoliberal government. They still did the right thing. We beat the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It was a massive trade agreement that the pharmaceutical industry spent millions of dollars lobbying for, and the US government really wanted to implement with everything the pharmaceutical industry wanted to make all the patent rules worse for many countries. And we worked with those countries and they fought back and we beat the thing. So we've done this a number of times, and the strategic context is a little different every time. And UAEM has its own victory stories, but just to say that, it can be done, and it's tremendously important. So I'm glad that you guys are in it.
I just want to ask, do you think there's any wisdom or advice you would want to impart on university students in particular, or like how you kind of got into this field or something like that, something along those lines?
Well, the thing about university activism to always keep in mind is your administrators are likely to pass you around, right? When you ask them for things, they're going to try and wait you out. And recognizing when you're being passed around and recognizing that you need to hold their feet to the fire a little bit that's a lesson that many of us went through, right? And sort of like, we're young, they're authority figures. We don't want to like necessarily always be rebel, whatever else, but like, it is easier for them to let this issue pass and let you graduate without resolution. So you got to take advantage of the time that you have. They're just their business interests working on them on one side, and your interests in a just policy are on another side. And if they will act when it's expensive for them not to, or when it looks really bad. So there's that. And to say that you're part of a bigger fight. What you guys do together is really important to us. in part because the university struggles, which sometimes are very important. Kind of depends on the technology, but what you learn together and how you bond, and how you learn about this issue, and how you learn to overcome political obstacles together is just going to be massively important to this or to other worthy causes down the line. And we want to be available to you to help you make that journey. And we want to be available to you as just, whatever example is useful on your own path. You're going to find your own way to contribute. But the fact that you're a part of this group, I think, indicates a certain kind of a thinking beyond yourselves and curiosity that we really admire, and we know is not always easy or simple. UAEM in particular also is one that tends to be a little intellectual, and so it takes a sort of combination of idealism and really curious intellect to get into it. So we admire that. We're here and we want to help, and we're just so grateful that you're doing it. But a little more tactically, because forgive me, these days I'm just really focused on this vaccine problem. We do need you also to turn your, I think, and Tayaba can shut me down, but I think that it would be awesome if you guys are able to also turn your eyes outside of the university and contribute to some of the national and international. I mean, what you do with the university contributes, but we have some very particular targets coming right up, like this October 22nd thing, Tab. I don't know, that's going to go down. I mean, you guys got to figure out what's right for you and what's comfortable, but we got to move the next U.S. government, right? Because if we continue with this kind of isolationism, the whole world's going to be in a lot of trouble. And we're all working virtually now, but still, we're all here near the nation's capital. That could be useful. And we're also just people who understand that there's a problem. And if we work together, it takes fewer of us than you might think working together smartly to make a real impact on something like that. Right now, for understandable reasons, the country is sort of very, very inward focused, right? We got a lot of problems that we need to work on. And the example of Black Lives Matter is tremendously powerful, and this election is tremendously important. I think I need to say that in my non-public citizen, non-electioneering capacity, but I can say the Trump administration I'm not supposed to take sides in the politics, but clearly the Trump administration is really bad, right? So anyway, so it's understandable that people are focused on certain things, but as we get through that, we're gonna just have to turn our attention back to the world a little bit, because if we imagine the consequences, just hundreds of millions of people, maybe billions of people going without the medical treatment they need for years. It's going to be a really different world. This is a story that we will have to explain to our kids and everything else. And we actually think it can be changed. But we just got to help the world focus on attending to everyone.
Very cool. Yeah, I think that's a really important point. UMD is right next to DC, and we're also next to the NIH and the FDA and all these other centers of government. So it'll be really important to us when we consider advocacy strategies and what we want to fight for in the university and outside as well. So definitely, yeah. Alrighty. Thank you so much, Peter, for coming on.
I'm so grateful. I would love it to be more of a discussion sometime, so maybe I can come back and participate. If you got a strategy thing going or whatever, I just like to listen a little bit. If you just feel like I'm up here talking and kind of wandering around, and it doesn't feel that cool. But I know these are early days for you too, so look forward to see where it goes.
Thank you.
We'll be in touch.
Thank you so much for coming up. Yeah. Alrighty.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Already talk to you. Bye-bye. Okay. So it was really great to hear from Peter. And I guess we will just continue on. Does anyone have any questions before we move on to more technical information, or anything they want to say about the presentation or anything like that? It's totally fine if you don't. Okay. Bear with me. We are going to share. Okay, so we're just going to move on to what we're going to talk about next. We're going to go into more of the technical aspect of drug development and what intellectual property is, as well as the problems associated with it. Peter talked a little bit about, problems that he has faced, within the past couple of years. But we'll go in depth into some that are more university related as well. So we'll just start.
Awesome. All right, so coming back to our PowerPoint, the first question we're going to ask ourselves is why focus on medicine? So why is access to medicine, kind of the basis of this organization, UAEM, so important anyways? Well, health technologies, which includes medicines, are a key element to ensure the right to health, especially when it comes to preventing and treating disease. So as you can see for our very first point, medicine is the foundation of any health system, which then organizes policies and institutions responsible for providing health to a population. So good health is essentially impossible without access to pharmaceutical products. And also looking at number 2 and 3, other key characteristics of medicines are that in general, they're a cheap and cost-effective health intervention, and they have fast and long-lasting impact on someone's health conditions. So we know why medicines are so important as they form the backbone of our health systems. Okay, could you go to the next slide? Yeah. So unfortunately, 90% of the world's medicines are consumed by just 10% of the world's population. So this results in nearly 2 billion people who have no access to basic medicines. So clearly, access to medicines is a huge problem that we're still working to fight. And lack of access to medicines, as you guys can imagine, causes a cascade of suffering to women who bleed to death during childbirth, to deaths of diseases that are easily and inexpensively prevented or cured. Taiwo, you can go to the next slide. And so yet 100% of drugs approved by the FDA between 2010 and 2016 begin their life with public funding. So this means that taxpayers, not big pharma, have funded the research behind every new drug since 2010. So we're basically paying for these crucial foundations of medical breakthroughs. And so why aren't we letting the public actually have access to them? And so that is a big reason as to why we're here today. Lack of access to medicines is one of the most crucial problems that stand in the way of better health. People shouldn't be denied access to life-saving medicines for unfair reasons, including those with economic or social causes. And Tabby, you can go to the next slide. So to learn more about how we can fight for access to medicines, we kind of have to go back to the basics first, so which includes the journey of a drug. So here on this slide, we have an overview of the drug development process, which includes research, funding, patenting, licensing, approval, clinical trials, and marketing. And my fellow UAEM board members are now going to go and explain a little bit more about each step for you guys.
Okay, cool. So the first thing we have first is research. So a university lab is where most basic science research for a drug occurs, where you look at the underlying mechanisms of disease at a cellular and molecular level. And then from there, you find specific compounds that target that disease. And basically, it is the backbone of drug discovery. And that's the initial, that's where the initial creation of the drug begins. So you have compound, and that's the role that many universities play in this regard. And another crucial part of the initial stages, especially of drug development, is funding. Funding can come from anywhere. It can come from public institutions, private institutions. It can come in many different forms, like partnerships or commissioning your research, or having a private entity invest in you. But what you'll actually see is that the NIH is the largest funder of biomedical research in the world, with around 65% of the world's total biomedical research being funded by the NIH. And all other institutions that follow are also governmental institutions of other countries that are all public. So the Canadian version of the NIH and the European Union's version of the NIH. So you see a majority of drugs are funded by public entities, so basically from the taxpayer.
So next, we're going to talk about patenting, which happens after the research and funding. So the patenting process is basically when the inventor will file a patent with the country's patent and trademark office, meaning that the researcher or inventor takes a claim over the product or invention or knowledge, whatever it is that they've produced. And then the patent will give the inventor the rights to lay claim over their product and essentially allow the inventor to exclude other people or companies from making or selling the product. And usually what happens with these patents is that they'll be given exclusive rights for 20 years. And this becomes a problem that contributes to monopolies and high prices of drugs. And we'll go deeper into the issues of monopolies and how these lead to unfair drug prices on some of the later slides.
So this is where we see the process of technology transfer, where you're going to transfer the initial science research to a private entity like a pharmaceutical company. So what you have with a patent is that you have rights as the owner of that patent to lay claim over it and no one else can use it unless you license that technology out to them and allow them to use that intellectual property. So we have two basic types of licenses. We have an exclusive license where the license is only used for that entities and that manufacturer can only sell the product and do additional work on that product. And that means it's exclusive, like that entity that you're working with will have exclusive rights over the research product. A non-exclusive license in a similar fashion, you allow other people to use your intellectual property, but other entities and other parties can use it as well. This is really important when we talk about decreasing monopoly power and increasing access to research, because we see that a lot of the times when you have drugs that are under an exclusive license, other drug companies can't come in and create that drug, and so that there's no competition in the market, and basically they have the exclusive right to charge whatever they want for the drug at whatever price they want to, because they can. No one else is in the market competing with them in that regards. So it's a really important facet of decreasing the price of medicines. So once we are done with licensing the intellectual property, most commonly it's to a pharmaceutical company. So private industry will take that technology and will go through clinical trials. Clinical trials are actually the most expensive part of the whole drug development process. As you know, like maybe in the news with just vaccine development, there are a lot of trials you have to go through before you can even get to human trials, and this is where a lot of failures occur as well. And then you'd have to go back to the drawing boards in that regards, but this is the most time-consuming process as well.
And then after the drug has gone through this entire process and finally has been approved by the FDA, it can then be focused towards marketing and distribution. And so generally this kind of is the last step, although it definitely can be started earlier in this journey of developing a drug. But generally, the main kind of push for marketing and distribution occurs after they've obtained approval from the FDA.
2 points I would like to mention is that the FDA is the one that approves the safety and efficacy of drugs to be on market. So pharmaceutical companies have to produce the research and the studies and its results to the FDA in order to ensure the efficacy of the drug as compared to a placebo, and as well as the safety and efficacy of the drug. Yeah, and then also another thing is that marketing and distribution, it has an interesting relationship to what pharmaceutical companies spend their money on. So previously I mentioned that clinical trials are the most expensive part of the drug development process, which you might initially think that pharmaceutical companies are spending a lot of money, developing these drugs. But in fact, pharmaceutical companies spend the most money on marketing and distribution and advertisements of their drugs. That's their number one cost, which says a lot about how they use their money. So yeah.
So what happens with our investments? What happens with the money we put into the making of a drug? So the money will go into the research and development of a drug. And once the drug is engineered or produced, we've talked about what happens. It's patented, and a lot of the times it's licensed exclusively. And like mentioned before, this is a big contributor of the problem. It leads to the restricted access. And exclusive licensing means that only the licensee will have the rights to the information and to produce and sell the drug. When you have competition, like say 3 or 4 companies that are selling the same product, the companies will have a harder time hiking up the prices. But if there's only one pharma company that's getting exclusive rights to the drug, it pretty much allows them to sell it for high, unaffordable prices because they're the only source of the drug. So they don't have to worry about competition or other companies offering it for a better price. And in addition, it also allows the companies to keep their information and their research data confidential. So there's no public transparency and no accountability, which kind of lets them get away with it. And
yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that leads to the problem.
Yeah. So some of you guys might know who this is. This is Martin Shkreli, a pharma bro. He notoriously got famous for increasing the price of a anti-parasitic medicine called Zarapram, I believe, from about $17 a pill to $750 a pill, and that caused nationwide outrage. But the funny thing is that he's not even in jail. He's in jail right now, but it's not related to the scandal that he's known for. It's on fraud charges. So it just shows you the legality of how pharma can get away with things, scot-free. And what we have is, in this nation, we have rising insulin prices. A drug that was intended to be free and open access for everyone by its creator has now cost over $300 for people in the US, and it's led to insulin rationing and people dying as a result of it. You also have the price of EpiPen skyrocketing since its creation long time ago. But pharma companies like to use loopholes and technicalities to increase the price, where in the early 2000s, an EpiPen cost about $100, and now it costs about $600. And this also plays a role in who gets access to drugs. I think Peter talked about this a little bit, but when you have a society that is profit-centered, a system that is profit-centered, you're gonna start ignoring people who cannot afford those drugs. And what we see oftentimes is that the global south gets left out of the picture and they don't get the drugs that they need and end up having a larger burden of that disease. So yeah.
Yep, so building off of what Tayeba just talked about, now we're going to be talking a little bit about neglected diseases. So first, what exactly are neglected diseases? They're a group of preventable and treatable parasitic, viral, and bacterial diseases that affect more than 1 billion people globally. So they are affecting the world's poorest people, and they impair physical and cognitive development. They contribute to mother and child illness and death, and they make it difficult to farm or earn a living, limiting productivity in the workplace. So as a result, these neglected diseases play a huge role in trapping the poor in a cycle of poverty and disease. And so when we think about the role of universities and other socially responsible biomedical innovators, there should be a particular focus on research that meets widespread public health needs. Yet research focused on neglected diseases, which affects hundreds of millions of people across the globe, but especially in the global south, dwindles in comparison. So clearly, pharmaceutical companies favors research into whiter or wealthier populations, limiting their research in neglected tropical diseases, or just diseases that are disproportionately experienced by low-income populations. And as you can see, looking at the slide, in 29 years, 1,556 drugs were created, but only 21 of them were made for neglected diseases. And so why might this be the case? Well, these diseases just aren't of great interest to the pharmaceutical industry because it just doesn't make them as much money. So developing medicines for these diseases can't guarantee them enough economic return to actually spur that commercial interest for research and development.
And we definitely see this a lot with antibiotics. And funny enough, vaccines, it's actually an exception that the coronavirus vaccine is getting so much attention and love from pharmaceutical companies, but that usually is not the case. So I'm just gonna go over a couple of pharma controversies from the past couple of years. So Purdue Pharma was accused of causing $2.2 trillion in damages amid the opioid epidemic. Purdue Pharma, they are the creators of OxyContin, which is an opioid drug that many of you should be familiar with. It's used to treat pain, a lot of times for surgery. And it's also one of the leading causes for the opioid epidemic in the United States. Purdue Pharma specifically targeted physicians to prescribe their drugs to people who may not need it, as well as really, really honing in on advertisement and marketing to hospitals, which led to the overprescription of OxyContin. And what happens is that most of the time with the opioid epidemic, addiction starts with drugs. Maybe you had a surgery, small surgery, or even sometimes you got your wisdom teeth removed. Your physician can prescribe you one of the most addictive opioids known to man and get out scot-free. And from that epidemic, they have profited millions and millions of dollars. We also, recently with the coronavirus epidemic, we have the drug remdesivir, which is used in the treatment of coronavirus. It helps with lung capacity. And what we saw was that its manufacturer, Gilead Pharmaceuticals, they labeled remdesivir as an orphan drug, or a drug that affects a population of under 20,000, I believe, which was quite funny because, for a pandemic going on, they're looking for special status for it being a rare disease. And we see that they charge $2,340 for remdesivir when they could make a steady profit of just pricing it at $8. So you can see that pharma companies have a really big margin when it comes to the drugs that they're giving. We see that in the industry overall, there is about a 16.7% profit margin, which may not seem a lot initially, but when you compare it to a industry like retail and just fast fashion, their profit margin is around 6%. So that just goes to show you how much money the pharmaceutical industry is making. And then, as I was saying before, insulin was created at the University of Toronto, a public institution, and its creator sold the patent for $1 because he wanted it to be openly accessible for everyone. But unfortunately, we see that the three insulin suppliers in the world have created an oligopoly over the price of insulin and have basically locked it out of the reach of many people. A drug that costs $30 in Canada costs about $300 in the US, and it has led for a lot of people to ration their insulin and ultimately die because of it. And that's been a bigger problem that we've been seeing on the rise, specifically within the US. And when you see this in the larger scale of things, you know, the United States is one of the largest, most powerful countries in the industrialized world even, but we have one of the worst health systems as well. So, yeah.
And then we're going to talk a little bit about this report card. So an organization called Prescription Justice developed a grading system, and this system is based on assessments of different representatives' votes, their bill sponsorships, public statements, and any money that they take from pharmaceutical companies. And so all of these factors were accounted for, and then ultimately the different representatives were assigned grades. So as you can see, these are some of the representatives who did not score well. So Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, the Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, and Senator Ted Cruz. And it's interesting to see that these congressional leaders, specifically seeing that the Senate Majority Leader and the Speaker of the House both scored Fs. And another notable thing is that Mitch McConnell actually received nearly $213,000 from pharmaceutical companies just this year, which is significantly larger than the other representatives. For example, Nancy Pelosi received $21,000 this year, which is still a significant amount. Yeah, so it's interesting to see how the leadership is scoring on the system. And then we have some representatives who scored really well. So we have Elizabeth Warren, Ilhan Omar, and Kamala Harris. And as you can see, they all basically scored A's, which is great to see, but it's definitely it's interesting to see the difference between like the congressional leaders and some of the other representatives. And then for the state of Maryland, we have like our state representatives. So we have Ben Cardin, and then Chris Van Hollen and Steny Hoyer, who is our College Park representative. And as you can see, they scored okay, but there's definitely room for improvement. Specifically, for example, with Steny Hoyer, he accepted about $53,000 from pharma companies just this year. So there's definitely a lot of improvement that we can be working towards. And I encourage you guys to look more into the factors that led to the decision behind these grades, because it includes a lot of specific information, like specific bills that they co-sponsored, significant votes, and also like specific amounts from different pharma companies and which companies. And I'll put the link in the chat so you guys can look into it.
Cool. So a really big part of why we wanted to mention it is because these are the people who are making our laws, and they are the ones who are allowing pharmaceutical companies to get away with this scot-free. You know, you think some of these things would be illegal, but they aren't. We see another prominent example of this with the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Alex Azar. He used to be the president of Eli Lilly US, which is one of the bigger insulin producers in the country and in the world overall. And there was a big conflict of interest in him being appointed to this position, as he was the leader of a pharmaceutical company. And it just goes to show you how our government is, you know, in bed with pharma. And even recently, Alex Azar wouldn't be able to promise a coronavirus vaccine that would be affordable. And it just goes to show you who's really deciding the laws and whose interests are really being heard. And it's definitely not the people's. And recently, with the passing of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Donald Trump has nominated Amy Barrett Cohen to the Supreme Court. And if she gets confirmed, she will, the US Supreme Court will have a right lean for generations to come. And that has put a lot of health access at risk, primarily with Roe v. Wade, as well as the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act right now is going through the legal system and will come before the Supreme Court soon to determine its constitutionality. And with this conservative lean, millions of people might lose their health insurance. So we see that, our system really isn't accommodating the people, and it's really accommodating profit. We live in a profit-centered world, and it just goes to show you that when drugs are, a person's lifeline, they'll pay anything for it. You really can't put a price on life. So we're dealing with no hands. We have no advantage, and pharmaceutical companies love to take advantage of this. So yeah, that's all we have for today. Does anyone have any questions before we finish off? So next week we're going to talk about advocacy tools and the potential solutions to how we can, fix the access to medicines crisis, and look at different things that universities have done, as well as looking at things that the government can institute to help increase the affordability of medicines. If anyone else has anything to say, but I see that it's 8 o'clock right now. So everyone is free to go. Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you.
And if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask, or if you want to say anything specific, just feel free. Okay, that was interesting to say the least. We definitely, I don't know, I feel like there was a big problem, I guess, with recruitment. Because,
I know like there were only like 10 people, or even less, because like 5 of them were us.
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think the problem is recruitment, because it's like we had a lot of people come to our interest meeting last week. I don't know if it's just like maybe this is like a bad week with like school like tests and stuff, because I know like this is a pretty bad week for me.
Right.
I don't know. Also like, but I was worried about it, but also like we had like 20-ish people fill out our committee